Yes, I am an entomologist, and I know a lot of you think that's strange, but I hope I'll convince you by the end of the 15 minutes I'm allotted that insects are actually the creatures that do run the world and that are truly, truly wonderful. And all of those 7 billion people we just heard about on this planet, their lives are touched by insects in many ways, but in a very important way through food, because all 7 billion people need to eat, and insects are responsible for a lot of the pollination of food crops, and I'll be going through some of these examples. I think the words from Charles Dickens are as apt today as ever. We do live in the best of times, and we've seen some of those best of times in the technology and the healthcare and the amazing stuff that we learn and know and explore about our world. But we also live in the worst of times, and we've seen some of that related to destruction of the natural environment. It truly is a time of light, and it is a time of darkness. And I'm sorry to tell you that for one particular aspect of the planet's life, of its biodiversity, all the 1.7 million other species who share our home, it really is quite a dark time, and we are losing species, we're losing habitats, we're losing ecosystems, and we're losing the functions that they provide and they support. It hasn't always been this way, and here's an example from East Africa that I love to share because it shows you how intricately involved we have been as a species with the world around us. Now, as a scientist, I basically study cooperation and mutualism and love. And this is one of the most interesting examples of that. You have here a sketch based on an old cave painting from South Central Africa of early humans collecting wild honey. Now, a lot of the early humans in Africa, as well as some tribes currently, were led to these wild colonies, which can be very well hidden in trees or in rocks, by a bird called the honey guide. And that's the honey guide. This is a honey guide that was soliciting me to follow it in Tanzania a few weeks ago. And for a long time, we thought this relationship of following the honey guide first evolved between the bird and a lovely animal called the honey badger. But it turns out that the relationship actually first evolved between bird and human, and this has been worked out by scientists studying the Borana people in Kenya. And the badger is a parasite of the mutualism that first came around between the two of us. And bees are incredibly important. I don't have to convince you, I don't even have to tell you this because you've already heard and seen the crisis around bees in the Northern Hemisphere. But something you may not know is that bees, honeybees, actually originate in East Africa. And just like humans migrated in waves out of Africa, so did honeybees. And the amazing thing with honeybees in Africa is there's a lot of diversity within Africa, just like there's a lot of human diversity in Africa. So the typical honeybee, which is kept by thousands of communities across Africa, is managed in traditional log hives, and this elderly gentleman is a member of the Dorobo community. He lives in the Mokogodo forest in central Laikipia in Kenya, and all of his income, all of his livelihood, paying his children's school fees, supporting his family, comes from beekeeping, from harvesting and selling honey. And in East Africa, there are two fantastic varieties of honeybee that we get to work with. The lovely mountain honeybee, Monticola, which is a very gentle chocolate-colored species and produces lots and lots of honey, and then the savanna or dryland honeybee, Scutellata, which is not so gentle and not so calm, but also produces lots of honey. And in addition to honeybees, another social bee that gets managed and that always surprises people to learn about are stingless bees. And Maria here is a beekeeper, a stingless beekeeper on the slopes of Mount Meru in Tanzania. And you can see a view inside the stingless bee hive there. And stingless bee honey, here are two different species of stingless bee honey, Iwele honey and Ikore honey, which come from Western Kenya, is as valuable, if not more valuable, than honeybee honey, which all of these different communities produce. Bee diversity is a really interesting cline, which is a trend in terms of populations and diversity, in that they aren't more diverse in tropical rainforests. The forests do have a lot of diversity, but interestingly enough, it's the deserts and the drylands of the world where most of the bees are found. And you have every kind of relationship, from highly specialized bees like this beautiful Cystropha up here that only ever visits one kind of flower and just flies for a few weeks a year, all the way through these lovely leafcutter bees. A long-tongued Amagilla bee. We'll meet her again in a few minutes. And then something I wanted to point out, these are all solitary bee species. And the females have nests to go back to at night. And you already know the honeybee, as I'm sure most of you do, that honeybees, it's a feminine monarchy. It's all female driven. They're all sisters cooperating and working together. Males don't do anything. And with the solitary bees, again, males don't do anything, but they actually have a little bit of a tough deal because they don't have nests to go to at night. So they have to sleep outside on grasses, huddling together for warmth. And here are two different species that are sort of snuggling up for the night, and they're very vulnerable. So I told you a little bit about stingless bees, because a lot of the work I'm trying to develop right now is managing and protecting stingless bees. And here is Stanley, who is a stingless beekeeper in Western Kenya at the Kakamega forest. And he keeps 5 different species of stingless bees. Those are the hives over there. And he even keeps species that scientists don't know about. We don't know the biology. We haven't figured out the nesting structure. And Stanley learned this from his grandmother, but sadly, he's not teaching his children. And that's for several reasons. One, the culture is dying out. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of habitat destruction. The bees are not as common. The market for stingless bee honey comes and goes. But what I wanted to point out with this example is that as we lose species, processes, and interactions, we also stand to lose a lot of knowledge, because the entire history of our species has been entwined with those of so many others. And if we lose that knowledge, it's just as precious as losing the species or interaction itself. Now, bees pollinate crops and wildflowers. And a quick question to you. How many of you like coffee? Chocolate? Yeah, and those are just a couple of examples of 2 crops that would not exist without the actions of pollinators. So the value of bees and other insects as pollinators is what I'm really trying to dissect and communicate. And about 2/3 of the flowering plants on the planet are pollinated by insects. And 1 in 3 bites of food is directly thanks to the actions of an insect pollinator. I'm going to take you on a little trip, and we're going to visit some of the field sites I work at. And here you have a map of Kenya. And what's been so wonderful is to hear how many people have worked in or are working in, and how connected they are to Kenya. And Kenya has, as you all know, this incredible network of protected areas, national parks and reserves, and you can see them outlined there in green. But the parks and reserves were set up at a time when the priorities for conservation were very different. 70% of the wildlife is outside the national parks and reserves. And when we look at the bigger picture of biodiversity, almost 99% of the endemic species, the real diversity, is outside those protected areas. And right here you can see Tsavo, which is one of the biggest Tsavo East and Tsavo West combined protected area. And there's a gap there. And this is that gap that wasn't included in the national park. And it's the Taita Hills. And you might think this is a very distant and obscure place, but I'll show you a connection to it in a second. And what's interesting, if you look at this is Mbololo Hill, the single biggest forested fragment that's left. You see this mosaic, this little blanket all around. Each of those dots is a subsistence farmer. And I'm working primarily with these rural subsistence farmers. But on Mbololo Hill, there are more endemic species and more endangered species and more vulnerable species than in the entire 13,000 square miles of Tsavo. And one of those species you know very well. It's the African violet. And this picture I took in graduate school just further north of here in the People's Republic of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the florist informed me that she sells about $10,000 worth of violets a year, and you've all seen them in your grandmother's window and hotel lobbies. But the African violet comes from one of the global hotspots, which is the Taita Hills and the Eastern Arc Forest in Tanzania. It was collected by German nuns in the 1800s. It was taken to Germany onto queue, and the rest is history. It's a global trade that's worth a huge amount of money, but until recently, we still knew very little about its biology in the wild, and so some years ago, I set out to understand what pollinated this plant in the wild, and it resulted in a small paper. And the basic mechanism is really cool. So just to frame this, pollinators enable plants to have sex. And there's good sex and there's bad sex. And good sex for a plant, just like for a person, is sex with a different flower or different person. And bad sex, bad sex is sex with yourself. So pollinators help prevent a very severe phenomenon called inbreeding depression, and I'll talk about mate choice and stigmas in a minute. But the violet, to sum up what was an amazing experience, is pollinated by this fantastically beautiful Amegilla bee, and it's a really kinky pollination system. It's called buzz pollination, where the bee comes up, it sizes the flowers, it understands the heteromorphic enantiostyle that's going on over here. I can tell you more about that later privately if you're interested. And then it grabs the flower, it folds its wings back, and buzzes it at a frequency, it vibrates it between 11 and 12 hertz. Only then is pollen released, and you have the production of the seed pod. And this simple, intimate, fun process is what allows hundreds of thousands of plant species to persist in ecosystems and to contribute to ecosystems throughout the world. Just a little aside here, Nature Kenya, the organization I work for, as I chair the insect committee, celebrated its centennial a couple of years ago, and as part of that, the government honored us with a set of stamps, and one of the species they asked us to depict was the bee and the African violet. And I actually did the illustrations for the stamps, so that was also a great honor. And here we are launching the stamps with one of the longest-serving members of Nature Kenya, Fleur Ngweno, who has selflessly led the bird walks for over 40 years and typifies the kind of person that is part of the society, and the acting Postmaster General, because the actual Postmaster General had just been summoned by the International Criminal Court in The Hague. So we're now going to go to where I grew up, the Kerio Valley in Western Kenya. And this is absolutely one of my most favorite places in the world. It isn't very visited by tourists or scientists even, but it's this phenomenal extension of the Great Rift Valley and extends all the way up into the wilds of northern Kenya and all the way to Lake Turkana and South Sudan. It is an incredibly diverse and lovely place to explore. And one of the crops there that is grown along streams that come off the mountains is papaya. And papaya is a really interesting example because you have separate male and female flowers on separate male and female trees, which means that a pollinator has to come along, go to the male flower, take the pollen over to the female flower, fertilize it, and then you get the fruit. And this service is provided by, in this site, 5 different species of incredibly beautiful hawk moths who fly at dusk for 15 minutes and pollinate those flowers, and they lay their eggs in the areas surrounding the farms. And without them, we do experiments with the farmers. You have no proper pollination of fruit. Another example that is from this area is mango that is grown, and I just wanted to put this in to show that in some species it's a very wide diversity of pollinators that come and visit the flowers. You've got flies, you've got ants, you've got wasps, and this is also an example of the power of communication in today's world, because I blogged about this pollination site on Peter's farm, where he grows 5 different varieties of mango, on my blog on Wildlife Direct. And within 24 hours, I had comments from India, Pakistan, Ghana, the United States, and Rome. And farmers in India were able to use the blog to compare it to their pollinators, as was the farmer in Ghana. In the US, a scientist identified the wasp as a very important parasitic species of ants. And the FAO, the Agricultural Organization of the UN in Rome, was so thrilled about all of this, they chose this site as one of their model pollinator sites. So basically, pollination services, I don't have to convince you, I hope by now, are driven by this wonderful diversity, and my work increasingly is communicating that with farmers. And the next clip I'll show you very quickly is a farm in Western Kenya, where Lucy Murira can tell you for herself. Okay, so we are here in the Nandi Hills, and we're at the farm of Lucy and we're surrounded by beautiful bees and all kinds of different crops.
Black beans are called jae in Kikuyu or nsabe in Kikamba and Kimeru.
Yeah, so this is a crop that very much depends on pollinators. And up here you can see one of the bees that's resting, but it has been pollinating the flowers. So without this pollinator, there would be no njahe.
I've seen the other bit of my life, which of the life of my garden, which I've never seen, and never really got so much interest on it. Pollination. I never knew that pollinators are very important, and there are so many of them, so different. Today I've learned that there are so many types of bees. I only thought there is only one kind of bee. Today I've found out that there are several kinds of bees. And it's so amazing. It's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we found at least 10 different types of bees just here in your shop. So there are actually 5 different kinds of bees so far that I've seen outside the National Geographic Society. So you don't have to go to remote places to find this diversity. I'm almost ending here, and I just wanted to show you a couple more slides. And this is a community of children, so a lot of my work involves working with children and schools. And I'm really trying to connect, being an entomologist and pinning lots of insects in drawers and looking at their genitalia and other details closely with actual livelihood. So this is Nalare, which is in Samburu in northern Kenya. And when you look at those children, and many people would say they look, they're in a remote area, they're poor and disadvantaged. But when I look at these children, I see something else. Because what we found were 30 different species of bee on this acacia etbica tree during their lunch break. And I've collected from the tortoise trees, which are back here where their classrooms are, 400 different species of bee. So I look at these kids and see them as rich, because they're rich in bees and they're rich in an environment that is full of life and full of amazing discoveries that they can make and control and participate in and love and enjoy. And I'm doing that with students from many different backgrounds, both university students. These are Georgetown students that I taught, and I played a mean trick on. That is actually a crocodile lying down there that they didn't notice. And guides across East Africa. These are 2 guides from the Serengeti. And students, this is a school, Huruma School, which is a secondary school in a slum in Nairobi. And they are next to a very large, diverse forest, but they'd actually never been into it. So really sharing that joy, sharing that wonder is what I'm trying to do. And very quickly, I have so many people I need to thank, so many friends and family. I won't even begin to explain who's who. But particularly, this journey hasn't been easy to get where I am and to have gone to Harvard. But my foster parents, and here we are on Christmas morning, woke up at 6 a.m. to go hiking in the rainforest in the mud, looking for the blue-headed bee-eater and the black and white casqued hornbill. I've had the mentorship and guidance of unbelievable heroes and friends, everyone from Dr. Leakey, Professor Wilson, and to my PhD committee. But most of all, I want to thank a friend who was the most tireless, loving, faithful, kind, and patient companion I've ever had, and that was my dog, Dawa. And I have one request to leave you with. If you can spend just 5 minutes a day in the company of an insect, your life will never be the same again. Thank you.